In 2020, Boulder reported a 22% reduction in emissions compared to the 2018 baseline. Recognizing what activities contribute to poor air quality can help us better understand our local environment and how we can all help to make a difference. So kicking off the conversation today is Grace Hood, and I'd like to turn it over to you. So Emily, if you could stop screen sharing and we'll let Grace. All right, Grace, you should be able to pull yours up now.
Great. How are we looking, everyone? Hello. Well, it's great to be here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Grace Hood. I'm a climate action coordinator for Boulder County Public Health, and this is just a really cool job that Boulder County Public Health created. It's part of the air quality department within public health, but it's really looking at public health and climate change and that intersection. So I get to do all kinds of cool stuff for my job, like working on an extreme heat plan, but also thinking about how folks at Boulder County Public Health get to work and looking for maybe greener transportation solutions. So it's great to be with you all today. So today I'm here to talk to you about air quality and transportation. And this is a really important issue because 1/3 of our greenhouse gases in Boulder County come from transportation. And in air quality, we're very concerned about the high number of ozone days that Elaine mentioned. So let's get started here. So air quality in Boulder County Public Health, this is the air quality program, and we actually are doing a lot. So I mentioned that sort of have an eye on climate change and looking, other folks in our department are looking for opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But there's a lot of other things. For example, air monitoring with the Marshall Fire. My supervisor, Bill Hayes, is doing extensive work with monitors. He installed some monitors directly after the wildfire to look at air quality. And this spring, we're in the process of setting up some monitors to really look at air as the soil dries out in the areas of Superior and Louisville. We're obviously watching ozone, and I'll get to that a little bit more in a second here. I also wanted to mention wildfire smoke. So those particulates are also can be pretty harmful for the lungs when there's a high concentration. And so another project that our team is working on that I just think is so fascinating is looking at wildfire smoke and how that impacts indoor air quality. And so this summer, we're going to be working on a pilot for low-income Boulder residents that really seeks to improve indoor air quality, particularly with an eye towards the wildfire season and trying to understand what those improvements look like. Another key area is oil and gas inspections. So Boulder County has some of the strictest oil and gas regulations in the state. We have somebody full-time who is regularly looking for methane leaks that come from existing well pads. And another really key area for us is radon gas, which can be found in pretty much any building, but I think homes for us right now is the particular focus since that's where a lot of us are spending time these days. But radon gas can reach indoor concentrations that increase the risk for developing lung cancer. Okay, so I mentioned to you all, so here's kind of a reminder of what our emissions look like. I know 2016 kind of seems old, but this analysis was actually performed in 2018 using 2016 data. And we do expect to do another analysis relatively soon. But what I wanted to draw your attention to here is transportation sources. And this is really about 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions in the county, as I mentioned. Okay, so as air quality professionals inside public health, a big focus for us in recent years has been on the formation of ground level ozone. And I chose this press release to show to you all because, it kind of sets the stage. So Boulder County, the Denver Metro North Front Range, we, at this point in August, had 53 ozone action alerts this summer, but it actually got higher as the summer went on. And this was just sort of a record that we experienced last summer. And I just really kind of want this to sink in, and we're going to return to this particular issue later in my presentation, but just to really highlight for you some of the challenges that we have in the air quality department when we're thinking about how to message with the public when there's just so many high ozone days. And this is something that our colleagues are dealing with across the Front Range. So just as a reminder, ozone is worse in the summers, and it really impacts sensitive populations. That can lead to decreased lung function. It can aggravate asthma. And for those of you who aren't familiar with how it works, just to kind of take a step back, you may have heard of like stratospheric ozone and the ozone hole. So that's good ozone. We like that ozone because it protects us. We have the Montreal Protocol, and we're actually in the process of healing the ozone hole. So that's ozone up high. Ozone down low can actually be harmful to us. This is ground level ozone. And so ozone is a really very highly reactive and essentially can give the inside of your lungs kind of almost a sunburn. And how it works here is we have nitrogen dioxide, so that's this NOx, volatile organic compounds, that's VOCs. These are ozone precursors. And so basically they combine with heat and sunlight, and that's how we get this ground level ozone. And the key sources for us, so you see the cars here, you see industrial sources, so that's power plants. But also a key source that I'm going to get to here in a second is oil and gas emissions. And we have some emissions here in Boulder County, but we're actually, based on our monitoring, have seen quite an amount of emissions kind of coming from Weld County, which is where the bulk of oil and gas operations are in the state. Okay, so in addition to those with respiratory conditions, I pulled this 2021 analysis. This was done by Jim Crooks, and it suggests that our frontline communities along the Front Range are some of the most impacted. So here we see that, quote, the ozone-specific health burden due to climate change since the 1950s has fallen disproportionately on disenfranchised and frontline communities. And this study really specifically referenced the Hispanic population along the Front Range and children living near the federal poverty level. Really encourage you to check this out if that's something that's of interest to you. It's a great study. So the next item here that's of interest is looking at transportation. That's why we're all here today, right? So I talked to the city of Boulder and grabbed a couple of key traffic counters at intersections. So this is looking at vehicles. We have Valmont and 47th here. We have Arapahoe and 30th right there, and then Table Mesa and Foothills, which is, as you can see, the most popular intersection. And I mean, just look at this swan dive that you see here in March of 2020. And then really how we're just kind of gradually coming back up since then. And then you really see an uptick here towards the end of February. Now, it's worth pointing out that vehicle traffic, I think across the city of Boulder, is still down about 12%. But the reason why we're all here today is, we want to talk about ways that, strategies to maybe prevent traffic from returning to pre-COVID levels. I think the other really interesting indicator here is transportation during COVID. So looking at bikes. So this is, there's a counter at Folsom Street, south of Arapahoe. A little bit different time comparison here. So we're comparing 2019 traffic versus the end of 2021, but down 35% for this particular counter, and then down a little bit over 10% for the traffic counter for bikes at 36, just south of Table Mesa. Okay, so I saw that I saw one friend from the RAC here, so this will probably look familiar to those of you who are at the Regional Air Quality Council, but this is a very busy slide, but I did want to include it because it shows that if you remember those ozone precursor gas that I introduced you to, the VOCs and the nitrogen dioxides. So this is from transportation, vehicles, this is on-road emissions. And you see how these two gases for vehicles are very much declining. This is a trend that we've seen over the last couple of years. Meantime, we do see that projected traffic is on the rise. So remember how I showed you that ozone press release about the record number of days? And it's sort of this kind of interesting push-pull that we have on the Front Range, because we are very much seeing strong emissions from the oil and gas sector while our vehicle emissions are decreasing. So I think it's just a reminder here to kind of put a finer point on what the transportation contributions are, but also to say, like, hey, we really want to continue the progress that we are making here on transportation. Okay, so back to this press release that I showed you all and the record high that we saw of ozone days last summer. And I think it, you know, I just kind of want to return to this because it was such an interesting sort of messaging challenge for us in 2021. So we have these record number of days, and this press release talks about 53 ozone action alert days. We actually got up to 60 later. This was issued in August 12th. But you know, as you see here, it says 39 consecutive days. I mean, that is just very significant. And so, you know, in Boulder County, our air quality team got together with our sustainability team in Boulder County to think about, okay, how do we message with you all on this? And so this is a press release that I pulled, but you know, interestingly enough, we actually moved away from press releases and more towards social media last summer. And so other messaging strategies that we landed on, and just to kind of take a step back, I mean, if you think about ozone, for those of you who don't think about this every day, I mean, ozone is something that you can't see, it's something that you can't taste, it's something that you cannot smell. So, you know, for example, in our air quality team, when we have wildfire smoke, we get lots of phone calls because people see it, they notice it. Think about that ash that was falling on people's lawn furniture over the last couple of summers related to wildfire smoke. We don't get as many folks noticing when ozone is high. So we kind of put together some strategies. Here's a screen cap of something that we made, which is sort of a click-through GIF that we put on social media. So it's in a way of engaging the public, both informing, but also providing actions that the public can take. So I like this one a lot. This other one, back to the kind of high message of days and the consecutive message of days, we decided to push out alerts on every 5th bad ozone day, simply because we didn't want to bombard the public with messages. So that was one strategy we played around with. But also our team, and particularly Christian Herman, who heads up the sustainability communications team inside Boulder County Sustainability Office, he came up with this counter tool that I quite like. And this was put on, say, for example, Facebook, and we would update it every once in a while to really raise awareness about the sheer number of alerts that we were seeing last summer. So, as we're gearing up for this summer in ozone, I think we learned, a number of lessons. And one of the groups that we're really looking forward to working with is a regional collaborative group called the Regional Air Messaging and Monitoring Group. And the power of that group is we have local governments really across the state. It's public health workers like myself, but also communications professionals, monitoring professionals who can really share strategies and help think about like, how do we message? And particularly like, if you think about that Jim Crook study that I showed you, how do we message to the most vulnerable individuals to really, reach and target the individuals that we want to message to related to ozone? And last, I want to kind of bring you all into the conversation and have an ask for you today, which is getting your help to think about traffic in Boulder County and how we can keep that at lower levels. We don't really want to see a rise to pre-COVID levels. We're really looking to businesses to promote biking and carpooling and busing, but also thinking about trip reductions via telecommuting. I feel like if there's anything that all of us have learned, it's that I feel like we've become pretty good telecommuters over the last 2 years. So I just want to say thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Yeah, so if anybody has questions, feel free to raise your hand or put things in chat. I guess one thing I was interested in, you did touch on the oil and gas as contributors. About how much percent of the air quality, air pollution are they contributing?
That's a really good question. Going back to, this in Boulder County, actually, let me just share screen again. Well, sorry, that's not going to work. But if I could just remind you of the Boulder County emissions report that I had. And so I'm looking at it, 38%, it says commercial and industrial. But essentially that includes oil and gas. I don't have a detailed breakdown. Actually, our friend from the RAC might know that off the top of her head. I would invite her to join us here and chime in if she wants to.
Yeah, Jennifer, if you have that information, feel free to unmute and share.
Yeah, Elaine, I'm sorry. Can you restate that question? I'm listening, but I missed that moment.
Oh, I was just trying to determine if we knew what percentage of the emissions and air pollution come from oil and gas in our region.
Okay, so I would have to look at our tables, but I'm gonna say it's about 10% of our total, and the total is in the high 70 parts per billion, so like 78.5 parts per billion. So I was looking at those numbers just yesterday. I want to say it's about 6.5 parts per billion is oil and gas. And I could, if anybody wants to dive into that information, I can look that up while we're talking.
It was just one of those curiosities. Another thing that I've been doing some reading on is the closer you are to a road, the more emissions you are subject to. Has Boulder County been exploring any of the strategies to help protect cyclists who might be, or people really, who might be close to roadways to help reduce the emissions?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any specific projects that we have on this. I think, probably the biggest focus has just been oil and gas emissions, and particularly emissions from Weld County. A huge investment over the last couple of years has been on just setting up monitoring at the Boulder Reservoir. And that is a wealth of information. I really encourage you all to check that out. Boulder Air is the service that monitors that. And I mean, it is incredible to have a local government putting in place just kind of top of the line monitoring equipment there. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer on that, but I do know what you're talking about, Elaine, related to studies and emissions close to roadways.
Yep. And as I understand, there's also monitoring out at Union Reservoir in Longmont, so that gets us even a little closer to Weld County.
That's correct. Yeah, local governments over the last couple of years, so Longmont, Broomfield, and Boulder have all invested in monitoring to understand the impact of oil and gas. And I just think this is kind of an incredible effort, and it's really been made possible by legislation at the state legislature that paved the way for local governance on oil and gas.
Well, I don't see any further questions for Grace, and I know we're going to need to let you go for your class. If anybody does have something they want to follow up with, we are more than happy to forward it for you. So thank you so much for your time today, Grace. That was really fascinating, and I already committed that we are sending the slides for it. I hope that's not a problem. So.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you for that. Our next speaker is Dr. Elizabeth Cruse from Boulder Community Health. As an internist with Boulder Community Health, she's also a frequent speaker for their community events. We're happy to have her here today to help understand the health impacts of air pollution and why we need to be concerned about our local air quality. Welcome, Elizabeth.
No, thank you so much, Elaine. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm learning a lot already, so thank you for including me. And I was asked to speak about the health effects of air pollution. I hope it's not too scary and a bit informative. So you can go ahead and go to the first slide. So what is known? I think Grace already touched on something. What is known about air pollution and health? Well, we really know this is a problem around the world. The World Health Organization estimates that there are about 7 million deaths per year that are due to exposure to air pollution. We also know, of course, like we've talked about, that air pollution is worse in urban areas and overpopulated areas, as well as in developing countries. And then also we know that reports from around the world show a correlation between the range of particulate matter, which Grace also mentioned, and daily rates of mortality. We also know that about 91% of the population of the world lives in areas where air pollution is above World Health Organization guidelines. So we're not alone in what we are trying to accomplish here. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So there are many things to consider when we look at the health effects of air pollution. Of course, there are effects of just short-term exposures. And then there are different outcomes with long-term exposures that can occur over days and weeks and years. The time of the year and the weather also can affect air pollution, the components of air pollution. I think, as Grace mentioned already, there tends to be more ground level ozone in hot weather, and then more particulate matter in the winter, and also, as we know, when there's wildfires. The mixture of the pollutants might also be important, the ones that you're exposed to. It might be a combination of effects that occurs. And then, of course, socioeconomic and demographic factors can be at play as well. Certainly, if you are, children can get higher exposure per body weight because they breathe in more air per body weight. Elderly folks, if they have chronic medical conditions, those certainly will play a factor. And then active adults too, as we've already kind of mentioned, is people who are trying to exercise outdoors. There's a lot of concern about whether or not they could be doing more harm than good. And really so far, just to kind of put a pin in that, the data seems to be equivocal. The exercise might actually be good for you if you can avoid those really high warning days. Go ahead and go on to the next slide. So there's lots of evidence that air pollution, especially particulate matter and ground level ozone, are related to poor health. There are multiple diseases here that I've listed that have been related. Most of the evidence is observational, but the good news is that there's also evidence from studies about improvements in air quality. So after air quality measures have been put into effect, they've seen a decreased mortality in those areas and improved lung function in children, for example. And go ahead and go to the next slide. So what components are linked to disease? I'm going to spend a little more time on particulate matter, less time on ground level ozone. I think Grace already mentioned that particulate matter is formed in the atmosphere due to chemical reactions between different pollutants. So there's different sizes, and the size really is important. The smaller sizes of particulate matter are the ones that are believed to cause more health effects. The actual effects can depend upon the physical properties of what's in the particulate matter, because they can include different things like dioxins, benzene, inorganic compounds, and metals. Ground level ozone, as mentioned, causes pulmonary issues and death. It can cause death if inhaled. And increased concentrations are really associated with higher death rates in warm weather, and actually can also cause DNA damage just to the skin and can impair some cellular functions. Carbon monoxide, I think we're all familiar with. Many of us have these monitors in our home. If levels become high, people can experience headaches, dizziness, weakness, nausea, vomiting, and it can cause loss of consciousness and death if the levels get too high. Increased levels, as we know, are also related to the increase in global warming. Nitrogen dioxide, we've already mentioned, is related to motor vehicle traffic and can actually get deep into the lungs and cause pulmonary disease. Sulfur dioxide is from fossil fuel combustion as well and can have some respiratory effects, and also, as you know, causes acidification of the soil and can cause acid rain and therefore affect food. So that's how that works. And then lead, which we see less of probably because we have unleaded fuel here, mostly comes from batteries where we are, but and there are some acute effects on health, like if you get an acute lead exposure, you have high lead levels acutely, you can get abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting, but what we really worry about are those long-term exposure neurologic effects, especially on developing brains like kids. So those of you who have bought homes, you know that there's always the disclaimer that about lead paint. That's really also where we see lead. Then there's the dioxins. Those come from more natural processes, apparently, forest fires, volcanic eruptions, but also come from industrial processes. And they can accumulate in foods and have been related to cancer and infertility and things like that. And go ahead and go to the next slide. So just quickly, because we've already kind of talked about this, we know that ground level ozone levels are also related to increases in mortality, increased respiratory illness in children, increased use of asthma medications, and we already have talked about where they come from. We'll go to the next slide. So I want to spend a little bit more time on particulate matter. There's a lot more evidence about disease from particulate matter. So what are we talking about these sizes? We talk about 2.5, 10 microns. A micron is a millionth of a meter. So you can see that a 10 micron particle, you can fit 5 of these in the diameter of one of your hairs. And then within one of those 10 micron particles, you can fit 4 of the 2.5 micron particulate matter. And so the smaller ones, of course, you can imagine are more risky. You can also see what this is compared to a grain of sand. And then I also pulled in a couple of examples of, like, what does this compare to for bacteria when you're talking about pneumonia and lung diseases. So, you know, the small particulates are about the size of a bacteria, although about a bit bigger than a virus. And that's what the little spiky thing is down on the right-hand side. So the next slide. So how do these get in? I mean, we actually have pretty good defenses in our lungs. So you all know that you have, when you breathe in, these particulate matter come in through the air you breathe. In your nose and you have hairs and mucus that try to collect the larger trap the larger particles and keep them from getting down into the smaller airways. But within the smaller airways, you still have some defenses. You see that the lungs branch off there, and within those larger tubules, the cells have little finger-like projections, little microscopic finger-like projections that brush mucus and any particles up and out, so that you cough them up or swallow them and get rid of them that way. However, those smallest particles, the ones that are 2.5 microns or smaller, can really get down into the smallest airways of the lungs, and those are the ones that we are concerned about. Go on the next slide. So this is a picture of the terminal ends of your lungs. So you guys have probably been to museums, or maybe you've seen this other places. You know, your lungs branch and branch and branch and branch until you get down to the very end where they have these little air sacs called alveoli. And this little cartoon shows the left half is a healthy alveoli and the right half is a diseased one, specifically with acute respiratory distress syndrome, but it's all pretty similar. The cell layer here between your lungs and your blood vessels is only like 1 or 2 cells thick, and this is so you can get air exchange and gas exchange between the blood and the lungs. There aren't any cilia or mucus down here because, of course, that would interfere with the gas exchange. But there still are some defense mechanisms, and the biggest one is these little cells called macrophages. You can see that in the middle. These little macrophages are like amoebas, and they move around, and they can actually ingest particles or foreign material, and they mount immune responses by releasing a lot of chemicals that attract other immune cells to the area. And we'll talk about how that can be a good thing, but sometimes a bad thing later. So we can go on the next slide. So we know that there are short-term and long-term exposure, we've talked about, correlates with increases in deaths, and that just like Elaine was mentioning earlier, we also know from studies that living close to roadways and also being poor is associated with a higher risk of stroke, and some studies by as much as 40%. We've also know that these things can increase your risk for congestive heart failure, or CHF, as well as death, and also just risk for chronic diseases like high blood pressure, diabetes, and atrial fibrillation. And the risk and probably the being poor is related more to things like poor nutrition, and then also stress, because we know just being chronically stressed reduces your ability to fight off diseases and increases your risk of developing things like high blood pressure and diabetes. Go to the next slide. It also affects pregnant women. Women who are pregnant and exposed to more higher levels of particulate matter have lower birth weight babies. They have more risk for adverse pregnancy outcomes. And those children who are in utero during this exposure actually have a higher risk for respiratory tract infections in the first 7 years of their lives, and a higher rate of emergency department visits for things like pneumonia. So it even affects them after they're born. We can go to the next slide. So how exactly does this work? I thought I'd throw this in. Hopefully it's not too much detail, but there's 3 broad pathways that scientists think that particulate matter causes disease. The first is there might be a spillover of these pro-inflammatory factors from the lungs to the circulatory system. You'll remember that I mentioned that these little alveolar macrophages, part of their job, and when they ingest or come into contact with foreign material, is they release chemicals like cytokines, which attract other inflammatory cells to the area to fight off the foreign invader, and also can cause swelling, edema, et cetera. And these pro-inflammatory factors actually can go from the lungs into the circulatory system and cause issues in other areas of the body. The particulate matter can also cause imbalance of what is called the autonomic nervous system. This is the part of your nervous system that is automatic, or you don't think about, keeps your heart beating, keeps you breathing, etc. And then these little particulates can also get right into cardiovascular tissues like the heart as well as the blood vessels. And pardon me. So This is a very busy slide, and I'm sorry about that, but I thought it illustrated all the things that can happen, and we'll just go through really quickly. So we talked about the deposition of particulate matter can lead to this pulmonary inflammation, and this response can actually, although it's helpful, as I mentioned before, can actually also end up being maladaptive. So they become this runaway sort of response that actually ends up causing more damage than the initial insult. That response can also impair the immune system's ability to kill bacteria, which actually then leads you to be more susceptible to things like bacterial infections. In the cardiovascular system, these inflammatory chemicals can make blood vessels more likely to build up plaque. And as you know, your blood vessels are like pipes, and if you build up plaque inside them, it reduces the ability of the blood to pass through. These plaques are also very thrombogenic, meaning that they are prone to develop blood clots, and blood clots are what cause most heart attacks and strokes. They've also done studies where they've measured the plaque buildup in people's carotid arteries over time with exposure to particulate matter, and they've seen that people that have higher exposures develop more plaque in these arteries in your neck. And then these inflammatory mediators that are released are also related to increases in insulin resistance, and you know that insulin is the hormone that helps you control your blood sugar. If you're resistant to insulin, you're more likely to develop diabetes. So they've done studies following, specifically they did a study following African-American women in Los Angeles who were exposed to traffic-related air pollution. And over time, they found that this increased the risk of development of type 2 diabetes and hypertension in the exposure group. They've also found that several lung receptors have been shown to sense particulate matter, and they also induce your blood vessels to constrict, which causes increased blood vessel, causes increased blood pressure, and then changes in heart rate and EKG changes, and trouble with heart rhythm, et cetera. So a lot of different effects on the body. So that's all I kind of had, and so certainly if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Cruse. And as I mentioned, feel free to raise your hand or enter questions in the chat if you have them. At the moment, I haven't seen any, so I'll throw in one, which is, I was interested, if somebody has asthma, how does that impact how they're reacting to air pollution?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We also call asthma reactive airway disease. So they already have a tendency to react more to stimulants in the environment than maybe other people who don't have asthma. So I think air pollution is just one more stimulus in the environment that could set off their disease.
Okay. Are there any other questions? This has been so very informative. We really appreciate you speaking to us and sharing on this. And, it's also very sobering. Oh, and I see Natalie has a question. How can outgassing from old buildings affect people?
That's interesting. I don't know a lot about old buildings versus new, but there actually one thing we didn't talk about was indoor air pollution. And a lot of us are exposed to, when we get new carpet or anything like that in our house, we all smell that new car smell that some people like. Those can cause lung damage and health effects as well. So probably in the same vein, any buildings do also have emissions as well. So indoor air pollution is really important.
We also have a question about the wildfires. I'm not sure if you know this. Obviously, we get a lot of particulates from that. Do those tend to be the larger or smaller particulates, or maybe a mix?
I guess I would say I don't know. I'm not an expert in wildfire smoke. I would imagine a mix, but certainly everyone living in that area is very concerned about those. Yeah.
And I think Grace was commenting that Boulder County did get some monitoring placed around the Marshall Fire area. So I think there was a lot of learning that actually happened with that wildfire. My understanding with, say, last summer, because we had smoke coming from so far away, most of what reached our region was the very smaller, the PM 2.5 particles. I think PM 10, you know, looking at your slide, those are pretty small, but I don't think they stay in the atmosphere quite as long as my understanding. And then a comment from our old friend Joan Lyons mentioning the radon risk, which is often an issue with older buildings. So that is definitely something to take under consideration. And, you know, a thing I kind of joked about in the last year was, boy, I wish before, you know, early in 2019, I had invested in the companies that make air purifiers, because I think they were very popular devices, both for disease prevention as well as helping handle indoor conditions with smoke and all that. Thank you again, Dr. Cruse. And again, if people have questions we have not been able to get to, we're happy to forward them on afterwards. And you don't mind us sharing your slides, I trust. So we will plan on sharing these with the public. So with all that, we can go forward, Karen. We want to kind of take a look at, you know, we've set this stage, and it's very serious what's going on in our air quality. The good news to me is we can all take a part, and, you know, we want to help you to do the things that can improve that. So next. We have seen, you know, this is similar to something Grace had already shown, but we have a high percentage of our emissions in this area are coming from transportation. It's somewhat similar in Boulder to the national average. You know, this is showing it at slightly under the 1/3. Other contributors include agriculture. Buildings are now an area that are being recognized as an area we need to address, just from heat effect to waste and other considerations. Next. So one thing that I think is very useful for us all is to make sure you're taking a look at what's going on in the air quality. Last summer, I certainly downloaded AirNow, the app, for my phone so that I could track it. There are hourly updates on these sites. And I included a graph. So I like that you can get current as well as historical air quality. And within this graph, one thing you might notice is in 2019, we were certainly having a lot of moderate air quality days. We started seeing some unhealthy for sensitive days. In 2021 was a pretty extreme year, with some days being ranked as very unhealthy. So for me as a cyclist, I was discovering at least I could ride to work in the morning, and maybe in the mid-afternoon with the heat, the air quality was pretty much at its worst then. So I would actually take a bus home. So using those kind of considerations for your activity can be helpful, and just how can I reduce my impact when that air quality is bad? It's great to have that information. Also, many weather sites are including that information as well. So next. Locally, here's where we are on the greenhouse gas emissions. So Boulder has been looking at some great climate strategies. We want to make our local environment better. So from a start in 2005, we did have a decrease to 2019, you know, the most recent solid records that were included in a recent report from the city. And we're looking for a goal of getting down to the 250, so nearly, well, reducing emissions by 70% by 2030. The next. How do we get there? Well, VMT, transportation, we see is one. And when we use VMT, sorry, we use a lot of acronyms, vehicles, miles traveled. In Boulder, from a start in 2019, or I'm sorry, 1990, we had 2.19 million miles a day. We did increase to 2.49. Our goal is to be 1.9 million. So we are looking at an overall reduction. So next. One of the things that's interesting when we look at the vehicle miles traveled is there's a difference in the mode share between residents and non-residents. So the city is recognizing it can be a little bit harder for the non-residents. So the goal is that non-residents drop down to 60% SOV and have 40% using other means. So people living close to the city maybe can bike, but transit and carpool are great options. And within the city of Boulder, getting that target to local trips being only 20% SOV, whereas walk and bike would make up a greater bulk. Next. So, one more illustration of just that resident versus non-resident trips. And we're showing a great trend line for that with resident trips, and providing a lot of different options is certainly helpful. Working with non-residents, there's definitely a lot of work to do. Next. Further in Boulder's goals are to become a net zero city by 2035. What does that mean? That's a city where the amount of renewable energy created is equal or greater than the energy consumed. And then becoming a carbon positive city. That is the language the city uses in their report. Interesting, as I was looking, there's different terms, different areas used for that. But that means the city would absorb more greenhouse gases than it emits, particularly with techniques like urban forest and regenerative agriculture. So yes, the individual actions in our emissions are important, but strategies that help us remove some of the carbon, trees, more planting, any means that helps reduce that. And next. I think it's great for people to kind of do that check of where do I stand? What is the carbon footprint? So the EPA has a great site. We'll put a link in the chat that you can do and evaluate that carbon footprint. So when you do that, you can kind of see where am I now and maybe help evaluate what can I do to reduce that footprint. Fewer trips definitely make that difference. So thank you, RAC. This is an image that they've created of the difference of fewer car trips per week. So the Boulder's climate report does state every Boulder resident driving less than 7.3 miles a day on average within Boulder helps us get closer to those goals. So the joke in my household, husband and I like to say, well, we forgot to drive today. And it's great to have those days where we've done something else, whether that's working from home, taking trips on foot, or carpooling or bus. Every little step makes that difference. And let's see. We are here and able to help you. So one of the great things about BTC is our services are available for you, residents, businesses here within Boulder. One of the ways we do that is looking at what transit options you might have, giving you information, helping people go through the process of getting eco passes. Last year, we found some great success working with some businesses on mobile ticketing. They weren't sure they were ready to go for the eco passes if enough people were in the office. So RTD does now offer mobile ticketing as an option for you to purchase the tickets. Using trip tracking tools, these can be really great. The My Way to Go and other platforms allow you to see how those savings add up, both in the financial and climate senses. Also, you know, if you're into the fitness, what are the calories burned by using other modes? We're skilled at helping people with trip planning, helping understand how do I get from point A to point B. So one of the things I'm advocating for is people who do have to drive into Boulder, figure out another way to get around if you need to go somewhere during the day. Figure out certain days, maybe you can carpool, you can take transit, even when you have other things going on. I know we all have active lives and, oh, I want to get home and be ready for XYZ. There's usually a day where maybe you can take that different kind of trip. Surveying business is a really important part of what we do because it's great to have that baseline, how your business is doing, and then seeing what kind of impacts this has as time goes on. Also, carpools, van pools, car share, e-cycle, and BTCs available. Come into your business to talk directly to your employees, whether it's at a lunch and learn or through transportation or health fairs. Next. Let's see. Do my time check, and I saw Natalie had a comment in chat about why there's such a push for back into the office when working from home truly helps on greenhouse gas emissions. I will say we have been hearing from a lot of businesses about striking that balance. And I know a lot of businesses and people have found working from home is helpful. They enjoy the opportunity. I understand a lot of people want to work from home on Mondays and Fridays where they have maybe a little more freedom and can get ready for weekend trips and other. So every business is taking that on differently, but by and large, we are finding that, you know, obviously within Boulder, for instance, there are businesses that have to be in person, but a lot of tech companies, even ones that used to say everybody always in the office, are now being open to at least some telecommuting or even the compressed schedules. Natalie also asked about distinctions in the air pollution. And I do think that, you know, last year, our high pollution during the summer, a lot of that was particulate related. Most monitoring stations do identify what the pollutant is. So whether that is ozone, which is more of that problem in the summer, versus the particulates, which really can be an all year thing. Anybody who's traveled to the mountains and come home on a wintry day may see the inversion that goes over Denver and creates that brown cloud. So I think we'll come back shortly for more Q&A. At this point, I would like to introduce my new colleague, Amanda. It's just been so great to have you on hand, and I'll let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about BTC and what's coming up this year.
Great, thank you. Great, thank you so much, Elaine. I appreciate that lovely intro, and I'm very happy to be here and to have joined the team here at Boulder Transportation Connections in the Boulder Chamber. So yes, would you please go to the next slide, Karen? My name is Amanda Mansfield. I am the new Senior Manager of Transportation at Boulder Transportation Connections in the Boulder Chamber. I've been a sustainable transportation planner for the past 10 years. I'm originally from New York City, so walking and biking, or at least walking, comes easily to me. And I was most recently a transportation planner with the city of Fort Collins, and just moved to Boulder around a month ago. So glad to have joined the team, and I'll finish up my time with a little update on what's on the agenda for BTC for 2022. So as some of you may know, we have been involved in advocating for some key state legislation that would do a lot to help advance the kind of work we do. So that would be work related to encouraging employers in particular to help their employees to commute more sustainably. And the bill we're currently looking to help move forward is House Bill 221026. So I strongly encourage you all to look up House Bill 221026. It's got a lot of great content in there that again would do a lot to advance our TDM efforts and the TDM efforts of other transportation management organizations in the region. Something else that we've been working on is organizing stakeholder input in response to RTD's proposed service changes in the system optimization plan. So that's, of course, a very important potential change upcoming is the change to service. And so we are advocating and trying to get other stakeholders in the community to advocate for route restoration so that we have the healthiest possible transit system to serve Boulder residents and employees. We also are, this is an exciting new development, we are hosting, coordinating and hosting the Boulder Transportation Advocacy Coordination Team, which is a team of leaders from key agencies and organizations across the region, so specifically CU, Boulder County and City. And the focus of the Boulder Transportation Advocacy Coordination Team, or BTAC, is to think big picture about vision, opportunities for coordinating together on the immense amount of grant opportunities that are going to be coming down from the feds and from the state to promote sustainable transportation, and just looking for ways to make sustainable transportation of the highest priority in the region. We're also coordinating the Boulder Valley Transportation Coalition, or BVTC, because there just weren't enough acronyms in this field. And the purpose of that group, and that's basically a staff level group. It also involves our TDM partners, groups such as Colorado Car Share, B-Cycle, et cetera. So it's these service providers meeting with staff to come up with ways, again, that we can coordinate together to promote these sustainable transportation services on the ground, make sure that people are aware and participating in these programs. We're also updating our BTC website, which is going to be just beautiful and you're all going to love it. And it's soon to come, so get excited about that. We're also updating our TDM, or Travel Demand Management toolkit, which is basically going to be all of the services that we offer, all of the services that our partners offer in a really easy to read, colorful, easy to understand brochure. And we're also going to do our best to promote the super exciting Colorado Clean Commute campaign that will be coming out shortly from Dr. Cog. Can't wait for that. We're refreshing our ETC program, making sure that our communications with new employee transportation coordinators and existing employee transportation coordinators are as effective and efficient as possible. For instance, we could have a quarterly ETC, or Employee Transportation Coordinator 101 workshop. We're also working with employers to assist, as Elaine discussed in detail, to assist their employees in utilizing telework, B-Cycle, Car Share, EcoPass, Vanpool, et cetera. Next slide, please. And the last two things I'll talk about are two exciting input opportunities. So as a lot of you know, RTD recently released their draft system optimization plan for public review. I spoke about that briefly. There's an opportunity here, a really important opportunity for you to provide input. They extended their deadline to tomorrow, so you have a very tight timeline, but still, we strongly encourage you to go to their website, use their easy to use online tool, tell them what you think, tell them what routes you care most about, why it's so important that certain routes be restored and maintained, and make your voice heard. And the link to that was just put in the chat. Further, there is an opportunity to communicate with the City of Boulder to tell them how you think the part of the street that hits up against the curb should be used. So whether it's for parking, whether it's for deliveries, whether it's for parklets, those awesome art installations that take up parking spaces, etc. So tell them how you think they should use those on-street sections right up against the curb, specifically to allow access for all of the road users. For instance, not just cars, but all the potential users of the street, and to make sure that we're using those spaces in the most efficient way, in a way that again increases access for all. So you can access the survey at the link featured in this slide. And I believe the deadline for that is March 30th. Karen or Emily, if I'm incorrect, please indicate as much.
I think it's the 20th.
Karen, you're muted.
20th. And we'll post a link. Emily will post a link shortly. I think she just
can't hear you. Can you put it in the chat?
We'll post, yeah, we'll post the link to it. It's there now. So the various links that Amanda just said, the questionnaire are in the chat, as well as the Emily posted the SOP, the RTD feedback pages as well. And I also see a good note in the chat from Natalie saying that if we provide RTD with info on how or when businesses like are planning to be back in the office, like which days of the week, hours, that would be helpful. So that's great to know. Although, yeah, we'll try to get some general information. I suspect that they might not be all consistent. You know, Google might choose to do Tuesdays and Thursdays. Some other companies might do something different, but that's a great suggestion.
The more specific information we can get, the more it will help us. So even if Google does, you know, Tuesday, Thursday, and somebody in the area does Monday, Wednesday, then that would help us understand that actually Monday through Thursday, there is a demand. So the more information we can get, the better. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Natalie, who, if people don't know, is our service planner for our region. So that information definitely helps. Speaking of people from RTD, Lynn Geisinger is also on the call, who wanted to also address the system optimization plan. So Lynn, you're welcome to unmute yourself and address the group.
Thanks very much, Elaine, and thanks for this great program. You can hear me okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, good. I want to second some of what's been said here. I think in terms of, well, I think what Natalie's putting in about, you know, the specifics are very helpful. And I really appreciate the fact that Natalie's here. She is a great service planner and we're lucky to have her. A couple things I've been working on. One of them is the fare-free days that are intended to be in the ozone season. This was originally an idea that our new CEO, Deborah Johnson, raised at the Accountability Committee. And now the state has offered funding. So I've been working with some of our staff and legislators and others in the in the energy office on putting something together for this summer. And I think that's pretty exciting. I really want to reiterate that this is a perfect time to respond to the system optimization plan. It closes tomorrow. If you don't have time to go to the link and look at the mapping, you can just send your comments to communityengagement@rtd-denver.com. I see a couple people putting in the chat the importance of getting service to Boulder Junction. I would agree with that. I know that the city and county do as well. I think we'll be going down to one bus. It's not open now. And when it does reopen, it'll be the FF4. I'm pretty sure is the only one in the plan. The FF2, the Express to Denver and the FF4 are both scheduled to come back. But the FF2 is scheduled right now at 38% of its previous amount of scheduling. And The FF4 is also at only about 62%. That takes people to Civic Center. So I wanted to highlight those because I've been raising them. Again, I think our service planners, I think it's important to note, and I've been talking with our CEO about the importance of having the plan state, this is a plan. This is, it's an iterative process. Our service planners will be continuing to move forward, but nevertheless, once this is in place, it's important. So I would urge you, if you have time in the next, well, today or tomorrow, to please go in and raise your comments. Thanks so much. And thanks for all you do at BTC and at the Boulder Chamber, because it really makes a difference.
Well, and thank you, Lynn, for all you do on the RTD board. You've been a great asset for our region to have our voice heard and all the efforts. You've certainly joined at an interesting time where it's been a very busy slate, I know.
It has, thanks.
So again, do check out this system optimization. I see Natalie has put an email address in the chat, as well as we have a link to the site as well. So if we can move on to the next slide. I just wanted to put it out there. If you had any additional questions for Elizabeth, myself, or Amanda, and well, I see Brent is, by the way, mentioning Twitter will be reopening at Boulder Junction shortly. That's like next week. So, these are things we do need to continue planning for. And we're wondering, we'd love to hear from you, having gone through today's presentation, what actions are you willing to take based on what we've been hearing today? And if you're a Boulder resident, what do you think of trying to achieve a 7.3 vehicle miles per day within a year? Is that realistic for you? Does anybody want to comment on that? Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in.
And I'll also put some qualifiers on that. My understanding from the Boulder's TMP, that 7.3 miles is, just to clarify, within the city of Boulder limits. So is it feasible, and would be very curious for those of you living within Boulder, is it feasible to ensure that your average miles per day would be less than 7.3 miles? Very curious to get some feedback on that.
It's Natalie. I would say that if you live within Boulder and you can work from home and you don't have to do certain travel, that alone is going to reduce a lot of travel when you add it up. But I don't live in Boulder. I'm in Louisville, but it would reduce my travel from home to the bus, although I'm willing to bike or walk, but some people can't. It would reduce it by over 6 miles. So working from home already makes a big dent.
Will, you had a Will?
Hi, everybody. Great to see the team again. I know quite a few of you on the call today, so it's exciting to be back in the space. I still live in the Boulder Junction area and walk our little dog right by the Twitter offices, so it'll be exciting to see folks kind of coming back in. I think my comment as a longtime cyclist and someone who's fortunate to live in a very dense part of town is, we've got these different sub-communities and some sense of neighborhood identity. So for folks who live within these places, this notion of like a message board or like community pride feels so cool, because I've got 2 natural food stores and shoe stores, and I have so much stuff within 20 blocks of 30th and Pearl. I think I'm really fortunate, but also in a unique situation in that way. So folks that might live by the South Boulder Recreation Center or in Gun Barrel, or maybe that new development at the Diagonal Crossing, if there's some way to get like community messaging to help share the words from people who live here and are daily achieving much less than 7 miles VMT, that just seems like a great individualized way to express. So great to see everybody. Thanks for all the work that you're doing.
And thanks for sharing that, Will. I know that Boulder Junction is looking at more like wayfinding and information signs, and I think it could be really interesting to, as you say, sort of include the stories. So we have another comment in chat. 7 miles a week is possible, not easy. I love this, seeing I average about 7 VMT per month by using a lot of other means. If you'd like to unmute and talk to that more, we'd love to hear about the motivation that helps you get there. Okay, I see you're unmuted, but I'm not hearing you.
I think that person's audio might not be enabled. Kay Goodall. Yeah, microphone not working.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Anyway, I think that's always really inspiring to hear of people. You know, I as well am a person where after losing a car in our household a year and a half ago now, my husband and I chose to be a one-car household. And it's very different to, live a life where I do not readily have a car available just anytime you need it. I certainly, if I say I'll pick up the groceries, I get to use the car, but considering my husband and I go to work in different directions on Tuesdays, I'm using transit or biking. And I feel very lucky living in a community where I have options near me, as Will was saying. The things that are available within walking distance are incredible. And getting access to transit really makes that difference for me. And having some bike facilities, which in my world are slated to get better, which I very much look forward to. The redevelopment along 119 and a bikeway that would go directly through that corridor, I think is something that will be very beneficial. Not only sharing the comment of not everybody is able to live where they work and have these distances. And, that is something to keep in mind for our larger community, what we in the planning world refer to as those land use issues that mean we do need to make some changes to how we're developing areas so people live closer. And I think that's why very many of us on the call today are actively supporting transit access at Boulder Junction, because that is the first and so far only transit-oriented development within the city of Boulder that currently has very little transit. So making that more of an opportunity for people, I think, can be really a game changer.
I was just going to follow up on that comment because I think we still have Natalie on and potentially somebody from Twitter. But Natalie, I thought you brought up an interesting point that frankly hadn't occurred to me before. But if Boulder Junction employers could coordinate and sync up their work schedules, say for instance, more in person like Tuesday through Thursday, would that stand a better chance of getting some bus service restored on particular days of the week at peak times? Would that be helpful to RTD? If that, don't know logistically if that would be possible. Curious what the Twitter folks have to say to that. But yeah, if there could be some coordination amongst employers at Boulder Junction, might that be possible and helpful?
Yes, because if the demand is there on a regular basis, it doesn't matter where the demand is coming from, as long as the demand is there. So like I said, if it's a business that does Tuesday, Thursday, and another does Monday, Wednesday, and on Fridays, it's probably a little lower, we would still schedule it Monday through Friday, as we have weekday schedule. But yes, that would help. And as long as the need is there, we can look at it, we can address it as best as possible. I think, everybody knows by now that our resources are very scarce, especially as it comes to operators, and then also financially, there is a struggle through 2027 in general. So once the system optimization plan has been approved, we will then go to work and take a look and see what we can and can't do and what makes sense, again, depending on the demand, what's there. And the more feedback, I can't stress it enough, the more feedback we can get, the better. The more information we can get about people's travel patterns, where they need to go to, from, what the time the days are, et cetera, the better we can help to adjust and try to provide the service that's needed. So thank you.
Hey, this is Brent. I'm the one that works at Twitter, and just to give a little context there, we had a dedicated set of employees that would commute to the downtown Boulder office from Denver, and many folks from out east, Louisville, kind of the Erie area. And when we announced opening the new office in Boulder Junction, folks looked up what kind of service was available. And even before COVID, people were pretty disappointed by the limited service available there. And so it's going to be a tricky balance of, if service isn't available, people won't take the bus in the first place.
Thank you for sharing that, Brent, because I feel like this is one of the issues, we are concerned about here with BTC, that we want to see service before people are back in the office, because we want people to have that option, because if they start going back to the office and they're not having transit available, behavior change really means at those points of change, you need to make sure people have those options. And if they don't, you miss an opportunity. So we very much hope not to miss that opportunity.
Yep.
So we're getting low on time. I do want to, respect people's time and schedules. I want to have another big thank you for Grace Hood, Elizabeth Cruse, Amanda, our Senior Manager of Transportation, and I'm Elaine, also with BTC. It's been great having you here today. We will be sharing information after this, so please be in touch, and just really appreciate everyone. Do not forget to reach out if you have questions, need help from BTC. We're here wanting to help you. I feel like I've had an uptick in having communication from businesses with the questions, with the interest in EcoPass, and whatever we can do to help encourage your staff to look at their options is really great. You can follow us on bouldertc.org. We also have our social media channels. Boulder TC should get you there. Previous webinars are on YouTube, and we are planning to bring that up to be able to share with you. So thank you all again for attending today. And do keep June 9th in mind, where we plan to meet in person again. Looking forward to that. It'll be Walk and Bike Month. Boulder is honoring and celebrating the entire Walk and Bike Month. We'll be working with our friends at Community Cycles on some excellent events. So we'll keep you informed about that, and hope to see you here at the Chamber. Thanks so much.